a panel and performance event. It's a podcast recorded event as well.
Glad to be back. We were here last year for the Hammersmith and Fulham Arts Festival, which has been going on this week in the glorious sun, and this has been supported by Bush Theatre as well. And we're independents, Lynne, Joshi, Ramsey, myself, Anjan, Saha, and this is the second year we've done it.
What are we going to be talking about?
Are the arts a democratic space? I think we all know that it's often spoken about as not a democratic space, there's a status quo and there are barriers. We're going to look at, are there any shifts in the tectonic plates? What can we do to make things happen? What are people's experiences and stories that can feed into that discussion? There are two sides to every story. There is a flip of the coin.
And one of the things that's been really good is everybody has a view. Either you're a consumer of art or you're a producer of art. And the barriers mean there are winners and losers on both sides. We've seen art like This Is America just turn everything upside down. If you haven't seen the video, definitely go to YouTube, check out This Is America. It's got something like 200-something million views now and had about 100 million in the first week. If that artist had barriers, then not only does he get a disadvantage, but people who are consuming it, people like us, don't see the change in society as a result of what he's produced. And the nice thing has been that with the Hammersmith and Fulham Arts Festival, Bush Theatre have supported us. They've got this conversation, which is great, and hence we've got the support. Bush has been fantastic in bringing everything in, the marketing, the tech support, everything has been provided to us. So we're very grateful to the Bush Theatre. And we've got some fantastic volunteers here who are helping us as well, looking after our brilliant panelists and the performers afterwards. And then, of course, you guys, all the audience who are supporting us for this event. So we're really pleased about that.
Call them down.
And yeah, so
it's
time to call the audience. Time to call the audience down. Everybody else. Can we get our panelists up?
Yes. I think each of the panel members are going to introduce themselves, just in, say, 30 seconds or so, before we launch into the discussions. I'm going to start to my left.
Robert Hokum, blues master of this parish. That'll do. I founded the Ealing Blues Festival 32 years ago, and I'm still the artistic director of it, and I'm a gigging musician on the manor. So,
I'm Bryony Meteyard. I am the director of Ignite Me Workshop Theatre, an inclusive theatre company, and I have recently been working in partnership with a charity called Rules, and we made a play, and it's by people with disabilities, people with mental health needs, and people with experience of long-term illness, and it's about their lives and their realities.
I'm Lynne Parker. I'm the founder of an organisation called Funny Women, which I set up 16 years ago in response to a misogynistic comedy client at the time who told me women weren't funny and that there weren't any funny women. 15, nearly 16 years later, we run the Funny Women Awards, and I've probably seen over 3,000 new female comedy acts, many of whom now are household names, through from Catherine Ryan, Sarah Millican, Susan Calman, Bridget Christie, Kerry Godliman, more recent kids on the block, people like Desiree Birch, Harriet Brain, who we'll start to see more of. And my passion is bringing new women through, new voices. We also have categories in film, performance, scripts and production. So we now cover the whole spectrum of comedy. We also have a corporate business, but that's not so relevant today.
Thank you.
Not sure how to follow that. So my name's Hassan Dervish. I work as a lawyer during the day and pretend to be a musical stand-up in the evening, and that's my role in that. And I also run a local gig in which more to raise money for Noah's Ark Hospice as well. So that's my position.
My name is Archie. I'm a screenwriter, playwright, stand-up comedian. unlike everyone else, I have done nothing of note that I'm proud of. So
That's not true, Archie.
I'm proud of nothing I've done. It's just been a huge disappointment to my family. They think I'm a clown, so that's about it. But I'm smashing the gig so far, so it's alright.
It's alright, it's alright. So that's great, because Archie's going to be emceeing the performance section, so that's great, you get more of that.
He's rubbish.
In comparison to Zoe, as you mentioned.
I'm only here because there's no women that are funny. That's
That was quite funny, actually.
That's my job.
So just to say as well, that in the performance section, we wanted to tie in, obviously, people who are speaking here as well. We are going to show a clip of a promo reel, actually, of the production that Bryony put up at the House of Commons early May. And that will go to some of the things that we're talking about. So, as she said, this was about social change and a group of people who experienced this disability in their lives, or either via family or themselves telling a story. But the filming of that was via a smartphone. So the resolution isn't going to be great, but that is part of the other point that we're going to talk about, which is funding for the arts, which is a real problem. So we're linking those two things in. So we're going to start with Bryony, and then we've got Emily, who I also saw at the event there, and she's going to be doing a reading, a poem, which we're looking forward to. After which it will be Robert for some music, and then we'll all rate Hassan's musical comedy. That's putting you on the spot.
Exactly. Sure, what to do then?
Just be aware, he's headlining, so...
Extra pressure, yeah. So, since I did mention the film, I thought, shall we start with Bryony?
Okay, I started, I did a degree in drama with English at Manchester, and it was in my final year that I was diagnosed with MS. And the universities do support, from my perspective, universities have supported disabled students, and certainly they supported me. And when I went on to do my master's as well, I felt that, I had a computer and I was given an ergonomic chair, and they were things that helped me. That came up against challenges. For example, my MS affects my eyesight, and so that became a problem with reading a lot. And I definitely, that is a challenge, and I think that higher education is not accessible to everybody with a disability at all, particularly a person with a learning disability. The higher education system doesn't have the provision at the moment to support people with learning disabilities through higher education. And that's something that I've known, certainly, that there is a theatre company that I know of that has worked on making plays about that issue, and they're based in Bradford. So I went to South Africa. It was a volunteer. I was volunteering for an NGO, and we were using theatre as part of that as a tool for HIV education, also for young people who are making plays about relationship issues such as being pressured into a young woman being pressured by a young man not to use a condom, for example, in an area where HIV is very prevalent. And then it was after that I did my master's, and then I went into working with people with learning disabilities, which I've done for 8 years. When that project ran out of funding, unfortunately, that was when I set up Ignite Me Workshop Theatre, which is a very new company. It was just founded last year.
But you've managed to get 3 productions, but one also has a commons, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So it's the same play.
Yes.
We've made this play. We made it in a 12-week process, but actually the first performance was 10 weeks in. So and this is just the rehearsal 2 hours a week. So it didn't take that many hours. We didn't have that many hours to make it.
But what was the impact? You've had some feedback. Certainly I was there for the one at the Jubilee Room, and it was the MP who sorted that out?
Yes, so that was Ruth Cadbury MP,
Yeah.
and she organised booking that room for us, and that was because she was unable to see the performances in Richmond or Hounslow, so she we wanted to bring it to the House of Commons, and we thought we would get more politicians in attendance if we took it to the House of Commons, but that wasn't the case.
No.
And we invited over 150 politicians, and we had four politicians, which I think is really quite, it is, and I think that
But if it was for expenses, they all would have rocked up, innit?
Yeah.
Yes, perhaps it should have,
And I wonder actually if that's because, and I do some work in government as well, I'm part of an all-party parliamentary group for women in enterprise,
Yes.
and I know from being on the inside that the communications is terrible. That, you know, I suspect they were invited, but no one think that you have to work in government is you have to actually have someone there literally lobbying you to go to things, because that's how the system works.
Well,
So
actually,
it's so sad.
the Secretary of State for Disability, Health and Work, who I've forgotten the name of for a moment.
I don't know.
She got in touch with me on the morning of the event, saying that could I contact someone so they could put it in her diary. So
She's called you, but I can't write it myself.
Put it in the diary yourself.
Yes,
you know.
exactly. So
I rest my case about communications, you know.
Oh, is it just initiative? There's no will. If there was the will, literally it is, I'm going to put it in my diary. I mean, maybe they have a procedure for that. But so you've had, I think, 3 showings now of that play?
yes, 3 shows.
One of them
yes.
at the House of Commons, and then Brian and I talked about the fact that actually what I saw was very powerful. There were a few councillors there who started talking about, you know, how can we help you in making policy change, and that's its real impact. And part of it, correct me if I'm wrong, is that a lot of your actors, and I see a couple of them here, are actually possibly not even trained or haven't been doing it as a profession or anything that would be, you know, compared to normal theatre, but were telling their own stories in the way that it was comfortable for them or useful or powerful to them.
Yes.
There were people in the room who were really touched, really moved, and you know, obviously I was one of them, and which is why I wanted to have you over, but also show the reel a little bit, and I hope that, you know, you get from it something of what we saw. It was an hour something production. We've only got 7 minutes of a reel, so it's more promotion. But getting the chance to then put it on would need funding, would need connections. How are you doing in that sort of arena?
So at the moment, this company is not funded at all. The way that we managed to put this play on was through 2 philanthropic donations, and funding came from the charity rules, which is how I met the actors. We lack funding, and I have been researching funding, and it's a very it's difficult. There aren't specific funding streams for making political theatre, making theatres for social change, making theatre with actors with disabilities or with different mental health needs, for example. If there is funding for those areas, mental health and disability, then the emphasis is not on the arts. The emphasis is on in learning disability skills and education, yes, and it isn't on the arts. It's it's sidelined, I think, and so it's difficult to get funding for these projects.
There's an implication there that the arts aren't as important to fund. I mean, obviously there's always going to be a pot, but there's maybe not seen important enough. And we've seen that in other areas as well, or in other dimensions when we talk about funding for the arts or funding for comedy, which I want to come to in a moment.
Yeah.
But so I would say that if anybody here, does anybody here know about any kind of organisations or any initiatives that would support that kind of stream of work?
What,
If
Bryony's work?
Yeah.
Esme Fairburn?
Esme Fairburn, okay.
Yeah. Cadbury Trust, is it Cadbury Trust? Yeah, feel free, I'll give them to you anyway. But
There's also that theatre company that works with disabled
Oh,
artists.
Grey
Grey Eye. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
Grey Eye are good for offering funding for that kind of thing.
yeah.
But there's also ways of applying for funding through different mediums that you didn't
Right. Yeah, you said
know.
that.
So,
Yeah.
for example, like I think that you can apply to funding from people like the BBC who are publicly up because
Yeah.
they have special
They do
funds
have
that they can give out. It's just that people don't really know about it.
That they have a philanthropic fund at the BBC. And a producer said to me, oh, you should apply, BBC should be behind the Funny Women Awards, we're trying to get more women into comedy. Yeah, okay, I've been doing this for 16 years, you've not told me that before. And they do have a fund.
When we talk about funding in arts and them not funding, in that regard, arts are a privilege, and we need to be aware that having and being able to produce art, the funding for that is a privilege that people, most of us that work in the arts, aren't always acutely aware of. It's a very privileged existence to be able to do this. And to that degree, it almost doesn't deserve funding as much as other things, like the NHS, like infrastructure analysis, all that kind of stuff. But the arts, it creates more after the thing has been created. So it creates more happiness, which in turn has a better existence for people, which means that they spend less money doing other things, which means the money will kind of reinvest itself back into that.
It's got a longer after.
Well, it's all about health and well-being, and I did allude to the fact I do quite a lot of work in business and that, and it's all about teamwork, confidence building. Some of it, I am not a mental health specialist. I've got my own issues, so I've had experience of it. But there's a really big part of what we do that does bleed into the sort of health and well-being of an organisation, and workshopping. In fact, that's your area as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
You do stress management and things, and humour and comedy is a really big part of that.
Yeah.
But going back to the arts funding thing, I mean, we're in the process. I've been running Funny Women for such a long time, and I've really existed because my background is marketing and public relations. I'm quite good at going out and selling and getting money in. So I've survived on commercial sponsorship. So I've done pretty well with it, not made a massive amount of money out of it, but with post-Brexit and everything else happening with government and the mess everyone's in, the market has just completely changed. So the funding doesn't exist anymore. And no one wants to know. And I'm now really, and it's the right thing to do, but I'm now in the process of setting up a charitable foundation so that we can fund all the not-for-profit side of Funny Women. And because actually a lot of our work is outreach. We're providing free platforms for women to come and perform, learn to write. We are very connected with the disability sector. Have you heard of Rosie Jones? She's an amazing...
Cerebral palsy.
Yes, she has cerebral palsy. She's fantastic. She's a real ambassador for, anyone. And Lost Voice guy, who's just won Britain's Got Talent.
Lost Voice guy, Tim Renko,
yes,
Francesca
Martinez. That's what's interesting about the world of comedy. It supports lots of these communities, not just my little female community. There's lots going on. Well, that is the perception of the industry. It is actually quite big. You've got thousands of women out there doing comedy, but somehow they're invisible,
I would say as well, when it comes to funding, when you look at stuff like the Arts Council, if you go down into the minutiae of how they dole out funding, it's actually very classist in that if you are, say, trying to take a stand-up comedy show to Edinburgh, that will set you back about anywhere from £5,000 to £15,000. a lot of plays that go up to Edinburgh, they can apply for Arts Council funding. If you're a comedian, you can't apply for Arts Council funding because they don't require
It's
comedy.
excluded.
Yeah.
It's excluded.
And-
But that's
Unless you're in
England.
Northern Ireland,
Yeah, it's
which
not in
I
Northern
have
Ireland.
just discovered.
Mm.
So if you're a Northern Ireland comedian, they have a whole, I could show you the pages, you can actually apply for Arts Council funding, but not on mainland Britain.
And I think there's an unsaid thing when it comes to funding a lot of the time, is that certain people deserve it and certain people don't. And when you're in it, you understand whether you're one of the people that does deserve it and whether you're one of the people that don't. Because even if, like, again, talking about comedy, if you start doing like a fundraiser or a Kickstarter, the amount of people that go, what are you doing a Kickstarter for? Why are you asking people to fund your thing? This is your passion. Why don't you just pay for it? And that's not how it works.
It's a very interesting world. There's lots of misinterpretation, and people do get the wrong impression. And, you know, I'm victim of my own level of success, however you want to perceive it. You know, I make it look good. I've left some of these around. I make it look good. And I've been told by lots of people, oh, why do you need money? And they say, well, how do you think all this happens? They think that somehow, they look at me, they think I'm a middle-aged woman who spent a lot of time in PR, I must have money. They don't know the first thing about me. It's about perceptions. And it, you know, it's exactly what Archie says. They don't do their homework, and they just take everything on face value. And that's why I like to do this sort of thing, because I think it's about time we all spoke up for what Bryony's doing, and, you know, festivals, anything that's promoting the arts, because they are so important. And we were talking earlier about arts being business as well. We talked about that committee I sit on in the House of Commons.
Yeah.
I'm
Said
the
most of the
only
time.
arts person on
Yeah, that's right.
in that room. We meet every 6 weeks. I sit in a room. I'm the only representative of the arts. Everybody else comes from a bank or an IT company. They've all got salaries and proper business cards. So do I, but I don't have a salary. But you know, and that's it. The representation of the arts isn't at a high enough level.
It actually goes, I think it goes a lot further than that, to entire genres. I've been involved with the Music Venue Trust, which is the lobbying group attempting to halt the closure of grassroots music venues, which are the lifeblood of the British music scene. And they got as far as having a meeting at County Hall. And a representative of English Heritage was there, and he said to an assembled room, quite honestly, I don't think that the people at the higher level in the arts take contemporary music seriously.
Oh my goodness.
And he admitted it
So
in
that-
front of the
of
room.
course,
So
the prejudice-
even you know, rock music, which has produced millions of pounds for the economy, is not taken seriously.
That is almost an endemic countrywide problem. It's this
Yes.
nostalgia, this nostalgia that we bathe in of looking back to the past and
I-
going, oh, that was great. Well, let's just love that, and all this new stuff that could be that soon. Fuck all that.
Yes, I have this thing with certain people in local festivals who just go on about it's all classical music and classical music. No, hang on a minute. But Beethoven wasn't British, nor was Bach, nor was Stravinsky. I said, you know, what about the great musicians that have come in post-war Britain? What are you doing for that culture? And there's a whole culture there that has been ignored, and it's a culture which actually is talked about. The effect of the British invasion on the awareness of Afro-American music in America is something which is lectured by Professor Roberta Schwartz at the University of Kansas. She lectures in this, the importance of what Britain did to wake up America to its own art forms. And yet, is that celebrated here?
Not yet. Not yet.
It will be if I have my way.
What was going to say just now?
Well, it was coming on from Bob's point, and in relation to comedy and the idea of nostalgia. There's no interest in risk taking or trying something new. So when you turn on BBC One, you see sitcoms which could quite easily sit in the 1970s still.
So true.
You do have the BBC i3, which is online as a place to explore newer stuff. But again, it's not given mainstream presence, which is a problem. So it's an ideological thing. There's a worry about taking risks with something that they perceive as new.
But I think down to diversity. When I say diversity, I don't mean diversity of people, I mean diversity of opinion. Because all the rhetoric that is pushed across the mainstream TV channels is all the same opinion. And the only stuff that we don't get any of the middle stuff. We get either the left or the right, and there's no nuance or anything. So if they don't bring that diversity of opinion, that middle ground, so much of that conversation is lost, and it just makes us feel like we're getting further and further apart, which I don't think we actually are.
It's the gatekeeping and the curation of what the audience or the public is exposed to, which actually starts making up the minds of people who are consuming it. But maybe there's a blind spot or many blind spots around the curation. You know, there's a lot of people here who would tell you stories about funding, not having access to be able to tell the stories that otherwise the public actually would support. I would imagine a lot of you would support some of the things that have been talked about here. But unless you know about the blind spots, it's very hard for you to make those sorts of
There's an experience that I had a few years back. I had a band called Blues Sans Frontiers, which was a sitar-fronted blues band with a Jamaican percussionist. We were playing, and I wanted to put this on a decent venue, and so I tried to hire the Purcell Room, and I was told by a prominent musician from the Caribbean community, he says, you won't get it. And I was also told that by a classical musician who had soloed in London. He said, they won't let you hire it. And I went on to the South Bank. I tried to hire it, either procrastination upon procrastination, and I was prepared to pay the money. And I had the sitar players, the grandson of Ustad Viliet Khan, which is a pretty, high-ranking thing in Asia. And I was just screwed. And I finally did the "Don't you know who I am" routine. I said, I'm the artistic director of London, of one of the biggest blues festivals in the country, and I found it. At which point they started getting a little more, but by which time I was forced to default. I actually did it down the road at the Bush Hall because I needed the venue. But it wasn't even about funding or anything else. I had the money, I just wanted to hire the thing for a very respectable concert featuring Asian classical musician and a percussionist who's winner of 5 times Blues Drum of the Year award. There was nothing.
You're also program events.
Yeah.
And you also work with Indian music.
Yes. Yeah.
Trying to get that program. And
yes.
How do you find that?
I find that as a blues musician, the blues audience just doesn't want to know about anything other than long, tedious, screaming guitar solos. Now, if anybody's going to play long, screaming, tedious guitar solos, it's going to be me. But I found that the blues, when I went out and said, hey, I'm working with sitar players, I'm working with tabla players, and like this, and the tumbleweed rolled down the A4020 out there, jazz audience, totally different. But there are prejudices within certain ghettoisations of people, and I think this has become worse. I think that in recent years we've seen more blinkered views of what is or what isn't what I like and what people like and what they don't like. And also particularly within the field that I've worked in, which is the blues, the very blinkered view is actually something which is not stuck in the roots of music, but something that was actually created by so-called musical academics in the 1950s, as is written about by Mary Beth Hamilton in her book, Searching the Blues. And I think that's also been a very bad thing, the way that, certain people take it upon themselves to be an expert in a music form, and then actually pigeonhole it into something which actually acts to the detriment of that, and they start going, it's not purist, it's not.
So it means that people who may listen to it don't have the chance.
Yeah, right? So people are forced into, so you find a lot of promoters particularly have this very blinkered view, and it became very difficult to get gigs.
Indian classical musicians, if they want to, like the ones I've worked with you, if they want to present classical music, they're told by the Arts Council and so forth, there's more money if you go for fusion. Whereas the classical music can do the purist thing, but the Indian classical will often do a fusion thing, which leads to confusion, unfortunately. Unless it's Blues Dharma, your band. So it's a different kind of spectrum where you're forced into playing certain roles.
So I would say it's not always just about funding. You're up against prejudices, preconceptions, and a whole mindset of an awful lot of people.
It's very institutional, isn't it? You've got things like the South Bank Centre, which is an amazing building, and it's going to have a new director soon because Jude Kelly has moved on, which could be a good thing. I mean, she's done great things with the WOW Festival and that too. from a female point, you know, and had other festivals, about a man festival. She's kind of done lots of different things and tried to bring in lots of new different forms of culture. But even I've been involved with that since it started, but there is a sort of an invisible barrier, and I don't know what it is. There is, I think it's because I'm middle-aged and invisible most of the time. Don't get me on ageism, that's another whole subject.
That is one of our
is it on there?
matters.
Yeah, but you know, but I think there is this, we talk of the BBC and other organisations which are, I would call them institutionalised because they are sort of, you know, government-backed or funded in some way. And it's like a sort of private club where they don't open the doors, and I don't know what it is. I mean, I haven't got a degree from Oxford or Cambridge. Does that matter?
Like, institutions are kind of like castles with moats around them, and you're not sure how to traverse that. But what's interesting is seeing how other people are thinking, you know what, I'm going to try and do this without having to approach the institutions and do it myself. So you've got an example like Michael Dapper, who's a comedian on YouTube, Big Shack, and he's been on YouTube for a couple of years, building a following, and as a consequence he's able to get a revenue stream through his own YouTube channel, and then he hit it big with a track called It's Hot, which is
Man's Not Hot.
Man's Not Hot, which is fantastic.
I'll be the black voice of authority.
And so, you know, it's I think people are doing it through collaborations nowadays more so than looking to old institutions for recognition and funding. And you hope your own peers will see the value in what you do and find a following and funding through that.
What's funny about that is that once someone has proved that they can cultivate an audience through an online following, like Mo Gilligan is another example. He's a comedian who did loads of Snapchats about a year ago. He's now touring the country doing dates at places that are like 2,000 seaters. Before that, like I knew him, no one was booking him. Because they never gave that opportunity. Right. But as soon as he showed that, look, there is people out there that will come to this, that like this, once he was getting 20, 30,000 retweets on every tweet, someone at Channel 4 went, you know what, let's give this guy a show and see if people will watch it.
But surely the function of Channel 4 and BBC is to be doing that job as well.
Exactly.
See, that's what annoys me. The Lost Voice guy that we referred to earlier, I was chatting to his agent in the week. Andrew Roach. And he was saying that until Lee, his name is, had got into competition, he said he did Edinburgh last year and he had like 5 or 6 people in his gigs, and he was in a little room and he lost a load of money. He is already sold out for every show this year. Absolutely sold out, because which is good. But that just goes to show you the power of TV. And obviously it's really big. Yeah, he is dealing with, though, which is interesting, talk about gatekeepers. You know, they've got that all sewn up. So Andrew, who's been his manager for a couple of years, he's trying to hold on to him because he's now up against Simon Cowell and what's his name, the big comedy promoter guy. But they are all trying to get him to sign with them.
So they want the following, they want the business.
Yeah. Now, just quickly on Britain's Got Talent, just as a warning for anyone that may be thinking about doing Britain's Got Talent, they make you sign a contract where, do you know how much the percentage is that they get of your wages?
I would imagine 50%.
80.
73% of your earnings for the next 12 years.
That's why they're taking to court, aren't they? The bands.
So,
wow, that's the thing that got the most outrage.
Very good, very good.
Gatekeepers. So it's the people like you, people on the panel, being part of that
We
conversation.
need diversity across. It's like even when we were talking about politicians earlier. Personally, I think anyone that wants to be a politician shouldn't be allowed to be one.
So one of the things that came out of our Forum Theatre performances, which were in Richmond and Hounslow, was we came up with these demands for change, which is what we presented at Parliament. And one of the demands for change was for disability discrimination to be seen to be as serious as racism. And so then we were talking, and we thought about the fact that there are so many often able-bodied actors who play the parts of disabled people in TV, in theatre, in films. And after our discussion, I started thinking about that, and I thought of so many. And I thought, in all the Professor Xavier's, this is one of them, in all the X-Men films, not once has a wheelchair user played Professor Xavier, even though he himself, the character, is a wheelchair user. And is that something that should be seen in the same way as if now somebody blacked up? Obviously, you know, that could never happen now, but...
Well, you'd be surprised. It does happen.
It does happen, yeah. I mean, but it shouldn't, but I mean, it was such a groundbreaking thing for Paul Robeson to be the first black actor to play Othello, which was back in, the 1930s, and so that was like a landmark, really, I think, for the inclusion of ethnic minorities in theatre, and for it not to be, for this offensive thing, blacking up, to not carry on. And so I saw an article by Mick Scarlett, the Guardian journalist, who himself is disabled. And so he was talking about, in the article, how actors are expected to what he calls crip up. So it's able-bodied actors, it's like a joke, isn't it, about the word cripple, but able-bodied actors taking on these parts, and...
It's Oscar bait, isn't it?
That's exactly what
it is exactly.
My left foot.
My left.
Can I say big up for the amazing Liz Carr? Liz Carr plays, I've forgotten the name of her character. I'm really doing that. Yes, in Silent Witness, and she has had the latest series. She had a big storyline, and Liz started out doing stand-up. And she did our awards and has gone on to do extremely well as an actor. But she has to fight her corner and is really anti the crip-upping thing. You know? And in fact, in the last series, Rosie Jones, that I mentioned earlier, plays a part as well. They brought her in. She played a girl in a care home who is abused. Very, very strong storyline. And I know there's a really big drive to get more of these disabled actors.
Tim Renko has had. He's got his own series on the BBC. He's got cerebral palsy.
Yeah.
And he's my mate, but he's one of the fucking finest comedians that I've ever seen. He is incredible. He's got a series on the BBC about having cerebral palsy and the things that he goes through. And I was talking to him about how many hoops he's having to jump through in order to not make the viewers uncomfortable. And I'm like, it's fucking bullshit.
Make them uncomfortable.
Exactly.
I mean,
that's how you move forward. It's so refreshing to see disabled people telling disabled stories. Although what Tim didn't like is when Lost Voice Guy won Britain's Got Talent, they got him into the BBC. And then he was just going, oh, so now I'm the voice of the Lost Voice Guy. That's what you're making me into.
That UK, and I don't know what the global stat is, but it's not too far from it, is 16% experiencing disability or have disabilities.
I wouldn't be surprised if it's higher than that.
Plus I think it was 16 and somebody mentioned 20, plus their families who experience dealing with, you know, everything that goes with that, which is a lot. That speaking to people who actually live through it is obviously going to be insightful. And yet on TV, on media, on advertising, it's something like 2%.
That'll come. That, you know, the world of advertising is always like the glossy end of it. They'll follow on when they feel it's safe to use it in advertising. They'll do it.
I saw an ad agency today. They've been there since 1994, and they're the first agency to represent disabled artists, actors, musicians, etc. And they're called Visibility.
Oh yeah, I've heard of them.
Yeah, they're doing a great job there. But also just in that R.J. Nitti, who plays Walter White in Breaking
Oh,
Bad.
he's amazing.
He's amazing, right?
I've seen him speak.
So
He's so
Yes.
inspirational.
So I looked up for this conversation that Bryony and I had. I looked up how articles around this, and since January there have been more and more articles about actors, able-bodied actors, taking those parts and actually then taking those chances away if they
You know,
take them.
it's meant that there aren't as many actors with disabilities who have the confidence, I think, even to audition for parts. I think there's, you know, many people with disabilities experience isolation and discrimination in a lot of parts of their life. So for then it to be that that anybody, you know, can play this role, and for there not to be any emphasis on changing that, why couldn't they make it a rule that you can't have an able-bodied actor playing the part? If the character is disabled, it has to be a disabled person,
So I
like
think
it
that-
would be with race.
Yeah.
Perhaps, I don't know.
I think that
It's-
comes down to the people writing the stories as well. Because
Yeah.
like I'm working with Channel 4 at the moment, and some of the writers they're working with, there's two girls who, one's got cerebral palsy, another girl is in a wheelchair, and they're writing their stories about a disabled protagonist. And when they shared the readings with us today, it's so refreshing to hear it from the person's point of view.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To what it's actually like, not what someone looking at it thinks it would be like. And it was so truthful that they're going to have to start making it. They're going to have to start doing it.
I was going to send you a link about that because after the conversation that we had, because there's a disabled journalist who was writing about how could anybody play the part who hasn't experienced, play the part of a disabled person in a wheelchair who hasn't experienced being on a basketball court and the burning rubber, and, you know, the absorption, the internalization of the experiences on a daily basis. That's just one moment that somebody who's living through that would experience and be able to bring to the screen, to be able to convey it. How can somebody who doesn't live through that and maybe, you know, prepares for it, but gives the external impression, how can they tell that story? How can they possibly relay that experience?
But most good art of any kind comes from personal experience, and then it's something you've lived, and that's what art is. It's the, you know, external expression of your experience.
So there's so much to talk about.
This is your
Subject matter.
We did talk about the authenticity and who can speak about specific things, and we've talked about Grenfell. And there is the conversation around the two sides of the coin, that if you've lived through it biographically, you'll have an authentic experience and therefore be able to tell that story, and so someone listening to that story really gets the truth. On the other side of it, is art all biographical? And can somebody else be inspired by it and give their side, so it's not a biographical, so maybe they don't play the part, or maybe they don't tell that story, the Grenfell's, you know, experience that we're talking about, but their impression of it.
My thing is, it all comes down to what it is to be human. That's what the story has to come from, organically, for me. And then I think as much as I love how people are able to define themselves in such a litany of ways now, I think the increasing amount of intersectionality creates more barriers in a way, which is both wonderful but also allows someone else to put that thing in front of who the human is. So, non-binary person rather than person. Do you know what I mean? Like mixed race person rather than person. And I think when it comes to subject matter, is the core of it's always got to be truthfulness of the human story and human experience, which when people write about things that they have no experience of, they make it about the things they can't experience rather than the human experiencing those things. And I think that's where a lot of stuff is going wrong, is that we see these things in front of the human and not the human.
And the issue about writing of scripts, I remember talking to someone recently, when people write scripts, it's usually race neutral, or when they're writing out, and then you find then when it comes to casting, there's a bit of fluidity about which nationality can play that particular character. And there's another school of thought that says that when you write a script, it should actually specify the ethnicity of that person.
I would
So
agree
then-
with that, but you've also got to specify when the white people are white.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Because
Not
the amount of
white
scripts
by
I've read,
default.
this person mixed race, this
Yeah.
person Syrian,
Yeah,
and then Anne Harrod over here. I'm like,
Yeah.
I know she's white because she
Yeah,
doesn't
yeah.
have anything of, like, come
Exactly.
on, you got to.
Yeah.
We actually saw 250 scripts in our last awards, and it was absolutely hilarious because everyone was trying to be politically correct. So I would say a good 30% of the scripts had specified, you know, one's gay, one's mixed race, one, you know, literally it covered it, one's disabled. It was really
And they all
interesting
walk
to see.
into a bar.
See, he can be funny. One of the things we didn't cover, and I really did want to cover, is being in the arts, as Archie said, is a privilege. It's hard. You've done it through self-funding, so via a job as well as other things, but also culturally, it's not that okay, is it?
Well, yeah, it depends what culture you come from. You know, your parents would think of doing stand-up comedy as a joke, is it? to play it up, because they'll be like, you should be a solicitor. So you go down a particular route. But now I'm in a place where you can actually then start expressing that creativity, which is great. I'm really privileged for that. So I've got a job, my wife's got a job, I use her income to fund my hobby, which is perfect. And that's where
Patriarchy.
that's
She
where
looks
my
so happy
funding
about
that's where my funding comes from, which is great. Yeah, so it is a privilege in that respect, because you've got to pay money to get to gigs. It costs a lot of money to travel. So you've got to, you know, there's a lot of people I know on the circuit that just can't afford that sort of thing, let alone the rent in London. So you know.
And the scene is bigger here.
Yeah, and the
so.
scene is bigger here. So that is another barrier for people.
We have arrived at the 7:30 mark.
You have.
It doesn't mean we've arrived at the end of the conversation. But, yeah, the 7:30 mark. So here is our interval.
Please do put your comments down and your thoughts down,
Please.
and your emails down, so we can add to the discussion and keep it going online. As you know, Hassan said, that is a new level of plurality with the internet and allows us access.
Yeah.
For the curiously minded.
So,
For the Christian minded, and HF Arts.
HF Arts is going on.
And actually at Bush Theatre, the handle, if you put your comments there, they'll know how popular this was. They'll put it on again. Thank you so much to our panelists for their time and their views and everything. I hope you enjoyed it.